So earlier today, FBI Director Christopher Wray sat in front of the House Judiciary Committee where he was grilled by mostly Republicans. Some Democrats joined in a bipartisan matter on things of importance, but mostly Democrats praised the FBI. It was very odd to hear after the summer of 2020. We heard so much about defunding the police and ending the police state coming from the left and from Democrats. And now in a hearing like this, we hear so many Democrats saying, we love the FBI. The FBI is wonderful. We need more of you. We need to be doing more. And so it was much to be expected from Democrats in today's hearing. Republicans, on the other hand, were a lot more, some of them were polite but firm with Director Christopher Wray. Others were visceral and attacking. That would be Matt Gaetz, looking at you. So we're going to play some of the clips for you today so that you can see. It was a 5-hour-long hearing. We've condensed this down into about 10 or 15 minutes worth of clips for you to watch. I wish there were some more that I could have put into the show for you, but again, it was just for the 5-hour-long hearing today. What really we wanted to get out of this is, actually Jim Jordan, he's the chair. He actually summarizes quite well. So I'm going to just go ahead and play this first clip because Jim Jordan actually summarizes quite well the concerns the American people, many of us, I know I'm certainly feeling these concerns, the trends that we've seen with the weaponization of the FBI, the censoring of Americans, the going after the politicization of the Bureau. He really summarizes these concerns, so let's go ahead and this is his opening remarks for the entire hearing today.
Think about what Americans have seen. National School Board Association, left-wing political group, writes the White House and asks them to treat parents at school board meetings as terrorists. And the Garland Justice Department does just that. They put together a memo, set up a dedicated line of threat communication, a snitch line on parents. As a result, parents get investigated by our FBI, get a threat tag associated with their name, 25 of them, because whistleblowers came and told us we're investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Americans have seen the FBI's Richmond field office put together a memorandum saying pro-life Catholics are extremists. They've seen 20 FBI agents, SWAT team members, show up at the home of Mark Houck and arrest him in front of his wife and 7 children, even though he had indicated he'd be happy to turn himself in. And what was he arrested for? Him and his 12-year-old son were praying outside an abortion facility. Some guy starts screaming in his son's face, and he did what frankly any dad would do, defended his child. What's interesting is the National School Board Association apologized for the letter, but the Attorney General refuses to rescind his directive. The FBI did rescind, thank goodness, the Richmond Catholic Memorandum, but they refuse to tell Congress who wrote it and who approved it. And Mr. Houck, when he got his day in court, he was acquitted by a jury of his peers. American speech is censored, parents are called terrorists, Catholics are called radicals, and I haven't even talked about the spying that took place of a presidential campaign or the raiding of a former president's home. But maybe what's more frightening is what happens if you come forward and tell Congress. If you're a whistleblower, come tell the legislature, come tell the Congress what's going on. Look out. You will be retaliated against. Ask Garrett O'Boyle, who told Congress about these issues. Took his clearance, they took his pay, they took his kids' clothes. Ask Gary Shapley, 14-year veteran at the IRS, handled some of the biggest international tax fraud cases at the agency. He comes forward, and the Justice Department kicks him off the case. But here's what's truly unbelievable. Here's what's amazing. With all that history, with all that, the Justice Department and the FBI want the taxpayers they censored, the parents they labeled, the pro-life Catholics they called radical, they want them to pay for a new FBI headquarters. And they want FISA reauthorization of the 702 program in its current form. It's in the director's opening statement. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. There are 204,000 reasons why Republicans will oppose FISA reauthorization in its current form. 204,000 times the FBI improperly searched the 702 database. And unlike the FBI censorship in the court's opinion that was focused on conservatives, the FBI's illegal scrutiny wasn't just limited to conservatives. BLM supporters were illegally scrutinized by the FBI as well. And I hope our Democrat friends will join us in opposing reauthorization of Section 702 the way it's currently done. And I think they will. And I hope they will work with us in the appropriations process to stop the weaponization of the government against the American people and end this double standard that exists now in our justice system.
Okay, so a lot there that he's talking about, the censoring of Americans. We all saw this during the Twitter files, right? That definitely exposed the fact that the government was colluding and censoring Americans. We watched them label parents, claiming that they were terrorists because they were upset about how their educations for their children were going. During school board meetings, we saw Catholics being labeled as extremists. That there were plenty of people that came forward. FBI whistleblowers came forward saying that the FBI is labeling pro-life Catholics as extremists and that they need to be watched. We watched whistleblowers, what happens to them when they come forward. They are then hunted down. They basically go after them. They make whistleblowers think twice, and we're seeing that even with Matt Taibbi. Gal Luft has been also indicted recently. He's the whistleblower that says that he has information on the Hunter Biden and the Chinese company, saying that he's got some information there. We've got, look what happened with Matt Taibbi when he came forward and he was testifying to Congress, and they took the IRS and made the IRS go after him. We see January 6th, we watched Tucker Carlson and the footage that he put out there when he was uncovering that extra footage that he was given. Showed a lot of people that were just meandering around the Capitol, completely peaceful. Some people actually stopping crime and violence, and yet they were still sentenced and are serving time for walking into the Capitol. There's evidence that the FBI may or may not be, looks like they might be protecting the Biden family, and while going after the former sitting president in Crossfire Hurricane and raiding his home. So basically, a lot of us have seen a lot of things happening. And Jim Jordan even brings up the BLM protesters and says they were even targeted. And that is something that I don't have the clip for you tonight, but I believe it was Cori Bush who actually did, in her questioning of Christopher Wray, she actually brought it up. She says that's the real, her point was, she was saying all of this stuff that the Republicans are talking about, this Twitter file stuff and whistleblowers and January 6th people that may, if FBI may be in January 6th, all of that is fake. What's real, though, is the fact that you're going after black and brown people, black and brown protesters. So even though she didn't agree with all of the points that Republicans brought up, she still did say, I do believe the FBI is targeting innocent Americans who should not be targeted. Jim Jordan brings up Section 720. We're going to get into Section 720 a little bit after we watch some more clips of this hearing today, because that is really the important takeaway of what are we going to do about all this? Because, when you watch these congressional hearings, you just wonder, is this all for show? Is this so they could get social media clips that trend and that they can maybe make headlines and they can look like they're doing something for their constituents and they get invited onto Fox News? Or, what is the point of all of this? Is it just theater? Is it just posturing, or are they actually going to do something that's going to benefit the American people? And there is actually a possibility that something good comes from this hearing, and we're going to get into that. It's in regards to FISA Section 720. It's an amendment to FISA, and we're going to get into that. But let's play this next clip. This is Representative Lofgren. She's from California. She starts off, and I don't have this part of the clip for you, but she starts off praising the FBI, basically saying, I think you're doing a pretty good job. And really, I think all of these people are conspiracy theorists, the things that they're talking about. I, on the other hand, really wish that you would use your resources to go after Donald Trump even more. That's my personal opinion. But then she pivots and she actually agrees with Jim Jordan about Section 720 and FBI spying on Americans. Watch this.
I want to ask you another question. In the Senate hearing, in response to Senator Wyden's question of whether the FBI is currently purchasing Americans' location data, you indicated that it was limited to data derived from internet advertising. It's since been reported that the FBI has admitted it bought U.S. location data. Is the FBI purchasing location data from commercial sources without a warrant?
This is an area that requires a little more precision and context for me to be able to answer that fully, so let me have my staff follow back up with you so that I make sure that I don't leave something important out.
I'll just close with the FBI had 3.4 million backdoor searches of the FISA database without a warrant in 2021. Can you say whether the FBI is continuing to search the FISA database without a warrant for Americans?
Well, if you're asking about our use of 702 queries,
I am.
those are, there is no warrant requirement under the Fourth Amendment for those queries. It's fairly well settled. The 3.4 million figure that you're talking about, I guess I would say a couple things. One, that's not 3.4 million people. That's 3.4 million search terms or query terms. Second, that's not those are not queries in violation of rules. Those are just queries under the
My time has expired, but the committee will look into the warrant requirement later.
Sure will.
Okay, so 720, again, this allows I'm going to get deeper into exactly what that is, but she brings this up again and she says, are you doing this? And he says, yeah, under 720, we're allowed to do this essentially. It's not against the rules. And he's right, it's not against the rules. Congress has allowed the FBI to use a FISA amendment that allows them without a warrant to go and they're not supposed to be spying on Americans. They're not supposed to be intercepting your communications. What they're supposed to be doing is intercepting the communications of foreigners who are on foreign soil. They're not even allowed to be here in the United States. But if you, let's say, email back and forth with a foreigner who is being surveilled by the FBI, and that foreigner is not on American soil, your email exchanges would be intercepted, obviously, because that's the exchange that they're reading. So they're deciding to spy on this person. The person communicates with you. They are now intercepting American communication from Americans on American soil. This is how they were able to get Tucker Carlson. If you remember that, when Tucker said, how did they know that I was setting up a meeting with Putin, when I was trying to set up a meeting with Putin? Ara Parampil from the Gray Zone, she was emailing with Tucker, and then she was emailing somebody that she knew. This was a Russian official who was in Russia, and that communication was intercepted. Tucker's name was supposed to be redacted. I think he was unmasked, which means that they're supposed to keep the Americans totally and completely redacted, their names redacted from any of these files. But when they don't, that's called unmasking, and it's considered a major violation of your civil liberties, of your privacy rights. And so when we heard about Tucker Carlson being spied on, this is the section that they were using in order to get that information. You're not supposed to be spying on Americans. Anya's an American, Tucker's an American. You're not supposed to spy on them. But inadvertently, you can intercept their communications and put them in the files, and you're essentially being spied on as an American. So this is a real problem that now Jim Jordan has brought up, Republican, and now Representative Lofgren, who's a Democrat from California, is also bringing this up. Now, Matt Gaetz jumps in with all of his grandeur. Now, he's always trying to get viral clips, but here he is.
The American people need to understand what just happened. My Democrat colleague just asked the director of the FBI whether or not they are buying information about our fellow Americans, and the answer is, well, we'll just have to get back to you on that. It sounds really complicated, but I have other questions. I'm sitting here with my father. I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following my direction. I am sitting here waiting for the call with my father. Sounds like a shakedown, doesn't it, Director?
I'm not going to get into commenting on that.
You seem deeply uncurious about it, don't you? Almost suspiciously uncurious. Are you protecting the Bidens?
Absolutely not. The FBI
Well,
does not and has no interest in
You won't answer the
protecting
question
anyone
about whether or not
politically.
that's a shakedown, and everybody knows why you won't answer it. Because to the millions of people who will see this, they know it is. And your inability to acknowledge that is deeply revealing about.
He says deeply revealing about who you are. Sorry to cut that one off. He continued to go after him. He did also ask about the spying. So Matt Gaetz then pivots after that. And he does say, you know, you guys were caught spying. And in fact, it even shows in these court documents that not only were FBI agents spying using Section 720, but they were also just using this database for their own purposes. They were like looking themselves up and looking up their ex-lovers, and there was a lot of nefarious stuff going on at the FBI. So he brings that up. Now, Representative Cohen jumps in. This is a Democrat from Tennessee. He jumps in and he asks about Ray Epps. So what everybody wants to know about. So here it is.
Do you have any knowledge of Ray Epps being a secret government agent?
No. I will say this notion that somehow the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources and agents is ludicrous and is a disservice to our brave, hardworking, dedicated men and women.
Okay, so he says no, there's no, Ray Epps is kind of ridiculous. But then listen to the questioning from Representative from California, Issa, because he then starts to ask about FBI agents who were involved in January 6th potentially. Here that is.
How many individuals were either FBI employees or people that the FBI had made contact with were in the January 6th entry of the Capitol and surrounding area?
So I really need to be careful here talking about where we have or have not used confidential human sources.
Was there one or more individuals that would fit that description on January 6th that were in or around the Capitol?
I believe there is a filing in one of the January 6 cases that can provide a little more information about this, and I'm happy to see if we can follow back up with you.
I just want an answer. Was there one or more? I mean, you would know if there was at least one individual who worked for the FBI who entered the Capitol on that day.
I can't, again, I just can't speak to that here, but I'm happy to get the court filing that.
Look, it's been 2 years.
Okay, so he's not willing to answer that. So that still leaves some possibility there open. So he says, no, Ray Epps, that's just kind of a joke, and scoffs at it. But then when he's pressed, what about FBI agents who were there on January 6th? And he says, I'm not going to get into that. He just refuses to answer that question. I want to finish up the clips. Again, there were there was a lot of Democrats saying this is just a show. The FBI is doing great. You have more Republicans pretty much reiterating and saying the same things, asking more specifics. They ask, some reps ask specifically about the Catholics that were targeted, about parents who were targeted, about whistleblowers, about going after Trump. And, they definitely they pinpointed onto those and honed in and asked some more specific questions. And we really didn't get any answers out of FBI Director Christopher Wray. There wasn't much there. It was pretty much what you expected. He just sat there and said, I can't comment on that, or I'm not going to, I've got to be careful on how I answer that, or no, we're doing a good job. I mean, that's ultimately what his responses were. But here is Representative Ken Buck. Now, I like Ken Buck. He is a Republican from Colorado. He was one of the few, if you remember the movie that came out, it was a documentary. Matt Gaetz was in it. It was called The Swamp. And he's actually one of the few Republicans who swore off taking PAC money, certain PAC money, corporate PAC money, or certain, he really wanted to rely on small dollar donations. So here he is, and I feel like he does a pretty good job of saying to Christopher Wray, look, we have some really big concerns, and we understand you guys want to continue using these FISA, you want to continue using warrantless searches of Section 720, and maybe there's a reason for you to want to use those, and maybe there's a good reason to want to use those, but we've got to start limiting this quite a bit, and you could see the concerns from Americans. So I think he softens it, and then Director Christopher Wray answers, and we get to hear what he has to say for himself with the behavior of the FBI and what he plans to do to make the FBI better. Watch this.
Director Wray, I'm concerned about FISA. I'm not concerned about FISA in a partisan way, and frankly, I am not in favor of defunding the FBI, nor am I in favor of splitting up the FBI, nor am I in favor of using the Holman rule for the FBI director. I'm concerned about FISA because I'm concerned about what makes this place special and the threats to us. And I would love to work with the FBI on how we can protect Americans at the same time protecting the civil liberties of Americans. And that area of FISA is what really concerns me. And I know you have gone to great lengths to try to work with FBI agents on how they access information under 702. And I know that at times it has been successful and at times it has not been successful. But the spirit of FISA and the spirit of our constitutional republic really demands that the FBI culture shift. And it shifts to a place where FBI agents understand that protecting American civil liberties, that protecting the privacy that we all enjoy in this country, even though we screw up, we still enjoy this privacy. And in court, we have the highest burden of proof the world has ever known to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that has to be, that information has to be gathered by the government in a legal way. And so I fear that we are going to overcorrect on FISA in Congress, that we are going to take away some tools that are necessary because there is a trust factor here that's missing. And I'd love to know how we can draw that line in a way that assures the civil liberties. I agree with my colleague from California, and I don't often agree with folks from California, but I agree with my colleague from California that it is essential that we not get geolocation information from the what I consider criminals at big tech, and that we protect that information for Americans. You, as a law enforcement official, should not know where I am necessarily unless you have probable cause to get that information. I'm also concerned about the ability of law enforcement, and particularly the FBI, to access information. When I go on the internet and I search for a gun vault or I search for a holster, I don't want the government to know that I own a gun. And I think I have that privacy right to make sure the government doesn't know that I own a gun, or any other information that I search for on the internet, unless you've got probable cause to make that search. And so I want to ask you a question in the last few seconds, and that is, how can you work on the culture in the FBI and help us reach that sweet spot on FISA?
Well, thank you for that. Certainly, we, starting with first principles, try to drive home every day to our entire workforce that our mission is to both protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And we have, on the issue of FISA, clearly had failures in the past. I've been very plain about that, and we've implemented a whole series of reforms. And if you look at the reports that have started to come out now from the FISA court, from ODNI, from the Justice Department, from others who have looked at the effect of our reforms, over and over again, they are showing significant improvement in compliance. We're talking about the most recent FISA court opinion finding 98% compliance and commending us for moving in the right direction. DOJ report found 99% compliance. Our internal audit found a 14% jump up to 96%. These are all separate reports looking at the impact of our reforms. A lot of the public commentary about our failures, and let's be clear, we have had problems, and those problems are unacceptable, and I'm determined with my leadership team to fix them. But those problems almost entirely predate those reforms, even though some of them have just come out recently. And so we're going to keep working at this. That is not a one and done from my perspective. I recognize that we need to work with the Congress on this issue, but this is an incredibly important tool. As you know from your own public service as a prosecutor as well, this is an incredibly important tool to protect the American people from very serious foreign threats.
Okay, so let's now dive into what the heck are these guys even doing? I mean, we do these meetings, they cart them in. What is the point of all of this? Is it just for sound bites and clips so that they can become famous and continue to be elected into Congress or write books or whatever? Well, there's actually some hope that there might be something that is done. First of all, there is the checks and balances. The House and the Senate, the House really passes the budget, and they decide on the funding for these departments. So even though the FBI falls under the executive branch, they are still bound by budgets. And when they go into these oversight committee hearings, and right now the checks and balances on the FBI would be the House and Senate Judiciary Committee, the Intelligence Committees, the Appropriations Committees, Government Reforms Committee, Government Affairs Committee. Those are all the committees that they could be carted in front of who essentially conduct oversight. And really what they can do is they can make each other aware of what's going on. The line of questioning allows them to find out what's really going on in the FBI so they can vote in certain ways. It helps them decide on the budgets for the FBI, and they could say, look, we don't like the way you're spending your money. You're targeting Catholics and parents and whistleblowers, and really you're supposed to be targeting child sex traffickers and foreign threats, if there are still lots and lots of foreign threats or something. I don't know if there's so many anymore from what we thought after September 11th anyway. And they could say, we just think that you're misusing these funds, and they could make them aware of that, and they could shrink their budgets. When they shrink their budgets, then they lose personnel. They might say, look, we think you're bloated. You have too many people there working for you, clearly, because you got nothing better to do but to target parents and Catholics. So find something else. We're going to cut your money. You don't need to be spending money on that. Focus on the things that actually matter. So that's part of the oversight that they can do. A lot of it is listening and then deciding to vote differently. And that's where this Section 720 goes in. So let's go over more in detail what Section 720 is. So Section 720 is, it's searching Americans without a warrant through what are commonly called upstream and PRISM, which are now called downstream surveillance. So this is an authority that was passed as part of the FISA Amendments Act of 2008. The law amended the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, which is FISA. So Section 702 is supposed to do what its name promises. It's supposed to collect foreign intelligence from non-Americans located outside of the United States. And as the law is written, the intelligence community cannot use Section 702 programs to target Americans who are protected by the Fourth Amendment. So they are supposed to not do this. Now, according to their Section 702, which you just saw the documents there, they say Section 702 is a key provision of the FISA Amendments Act of 2008 that permits the government to conduct targeted surveillance of foreign persons located outside of the United States with the compelled assistance of electronic communications service providers to acquire foreign intelligence information. They said the government uses the information collected under Section 702 to protect the United States and its allies from hostile foreign adversaries, including terrorists, proliferators, and spies, and to inform cybersecurity efforts. Why do they need this? Why was this added into FISA? And they say Congress enacted Section 702 to address a collection gap that resulted from the evolution of technology in years after FISA was passed in 1978. By the mid-2000s, many terrorists and other foreign adversaries were using email accounts serviced by U.S. companies. Because of this change in communications technology, the government had to seek individual court orders based on a finding of probable cause to obtain the communications of non-U.S. persons located abroad. So basically, because the server they were using or the business they were using to communicate was U.S.-based, they would have to get a warrant in order to search, when previously they could just spy on foreigners on foreign soil, and that would be fine. They could go ahead and do that. Well, once the communication comes bouncing into the United States and then back out, they would have to seek a warrant. So this Section 720 was to allow them to bypass that, because it would allow them to just spy on foreigners in foreign countries, even if they were using U.S.-based technology. That sounds reasonable enough. I suppose they were, it depends on how we could get into a deeper discussion about spying on foreigners in general, but let's just say you're fine with that and that idea. If you're fine with that and that idea, then Section 720 just bridges the gap that says you can still continue to spy on them no matter what kind of communication they're using. They might be using, Gmail or Yahoo or whatever, email accounts, right? It says on their own website, who can the IC target under Section 702? Non-U.S. persons located abroad who are expected to possess, receive, or communicate foreign intelligence information. So they still have to think the foreigner has some sort of, they got to have a reason to suspect this foreigner to spy on them. Who can't the IC target under Section 702? U.S. persons, regardless of location, any person located inside the U.S., a foreign person located abroad for the purpose of targeting a U.S. person or person inside the U.S. with whom the foreign person is communicating, often called reverse targeting. But it turns out, we find out through court cases that they in fact are intercepting American communications with American citizens who are even sitting on American soil. And that is where that number came in. Jim Jordan started mentioning a number of 200 and something thousand times that the government had, that the FBI had done this. And that comes from this court case. That is the United States Foreign Intelligence Service Court of Washington, D.C. It's a heavily redacted document, but essentially they found that over 250,000 times the FBI did in fact surveil Americans when they should not have been surveilling Americans. Tucker Carlson being one of them, and Anya Parampil from the Gray Zone. So a lot of people in Congress are wanting to get rid of Section 720. They don't think that it should be allowed because it's ultimately being used against Americans or intercepting communications with Americans. Now let's go ahead and look at the last time this was voted on. It's set to expire. The reason why this is important is because it's set to expire at the end of this year. So they're going to have to vote on it this year, whether or not they're going to continue doing this. The last time they voted on this was in 2018. Now let's go over that vote because this was under the Donald Trump administration and it did renew under the Donald Trump administration. And interestingly, more Republicans voted for this than Democrats. You can see the yays and the nays. The total yays is 256 in the House to 164 nays. And Republicans, it was 191 Republicans said yes, they wanted this to continue this amendment. And 45 Republicans said no. Democrats, it was 65 saying yes and 119 saying no to this. And in the Senate, it was something similar. We saw more Republicans voting for this than Democrats. It was 65 yays, 34 nays. The vast majority of the yays were Republicans. The vast majority of the nays were Democrats. And it ultimately passed, and Donald Trump ultimately signed it. What's interesting, though, is Donald Trump tweeted that he was against it. He actually made a couple of tweets. He himself was not for this. He says, disproven and paid for by Democrats, dossier used to spy on Trump campaign. Did FBI use intel tool to influence the election? Fox and Friends, did Dems or Clinton also pay Russians? Where are hidden and smashed DNC servers? Where are crooked Hillary emails? What a mess. So he's saying, did the FBI use this intel tool to influence the election? He then tweets again. That was at 3:30 in the morning. He tweets again, House votes on controversial FISA Act today. This is the act that may have been used with the help of the discredited and phony dossier so badly surveil and abuse the Trump campaign by previous administration and others. So interestingly, Trump was against this amendment. He didn't like it, but Republicans were overwhelmingly in favor of it. They ultimately passed it in both the House and the Senate, and Trump ultimately signed it. So he did say, today I signed into law the FISA Amendments Reauthorization Act of 2017. The act reauthorizes Title VII of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act until December 31st of 2023. That's this year. That's why they're talking about it now. That's why they're voting on it now. So let's look at some of the people that we just watched in the video, how they voted, because this is where it gets really kind of interesting. When we look at how they voted, Jim Jordan, who's a Republican, he was one of the few nays. He did not want this in 2018. He clearly does not want this now in 2023. Representative Lofgren, the woman in green, who's a Democrat, who said, I think you guys should be going after Trump a little bit more, but then she went and pressed him on this Section 720. She actually also voted against it, but at that time, most Democrats voted against it. However, her line of questioning leads me to believe she probably will also vote against it. It may not be partisan. Well, it'll be interesting how the vote happens this year, because now that things have flipped and now that you've got more Republicans skeptical of the FBI and you've got more Democrats now in favor of the FBI simply because this is partisan and Republicans are against them, so they have to, of course, be for them. It'll be interesting to see if the vote flips this time around this year. But she voted against it, as well as Jim Jordan. Matt Gaetz, who also jumped in and said, oh, you've been surveilling Americans and how dare you, he actually voted for Section 720. Representative Cohen from Tennessee, I actually didn't look to see how he voted. Let me just look real quick to see how Cohen voted, if he was even in the House at the time. Doesn't even look like he was in the House, so his name isn't even on the list. Representative Issa from California, he was also questioning about this, or he was actually questioning more about the FBI involvement in January 6th, but he voted yes for Section 720. And Ken Buck, the last one, who was summarizing his concerns, the Republican from Colorado, he voted against Section 720. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this time around. But these types of hearings are really important because they raise awareness. A lot of Americans don't even have any idea what Section 720 is. They didn't even know it existed. We didn't even bring it up when we talked about Tucker Carlson and Anya Parampil being surveilled by the U.S. government. We didn't even mention Section 702, I'm sorry, 702. Have I been getting this wrong the whole time? I think I've been saying 720. It's 702. So just remember, 702, 702, 702, 702. So we're going to see now that people are more aware of this section, people are aware that this exists, they're aware that this is happening. It's going to be interesting to see if these types of hearings are going to help push us in a direction where we stop being surveilled by our intelligence community. The last reason why these hearings are really important is because ultimately, at the end of the day, the FBI, the DOJ, the IRS, all of them are under the executive branch, and we are in an election cycle. So it's important to find out, how are the presidential candidates going to respond to these types of questions, to these types of concerns that Americans are having? Where do they stand when it comes to Section 702? Where do they stand when it comes to the FBI targeting Americans, BLM protesters, Catholics that are pro-life? Where do they stand with this? And right now, the only candidates that I can think of, I mean, I haven't really looked at all of the Republicans that are out there. There's kind of a sea of them right now, but the candidates that I'm really watching, that I've seen really speak out against the FBI and surveillance of Americans, primarily Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and also Donald Trump. Those are the only candidates that I can see who are actually paying attention to these concerns and actually addressing these concerns in their campaigns. But we would like to see more of these candidates actually step up, especially those Republicans, the sea of Republicans coming forward and saying they need to actually come out and state how they feel about the intelligence community, how they feel about the FBI, how they feel about FISA, how they feel about 702. We want to know. So these hearings are important. The more they're put out there, the more they're publicized, the more these questions come up when these candidates are pressed. And ultimately, if they get into office, these departments are under their umbrella, and they're the ones who get to direct them ultimately. And we want to see some change. We want to see some serious change, many of us in this country. And a lot of that is bipartisan, if people are being quite honest about it. So that is really the point of these hearings, why they can be important for actually making change. It comes down to the oversight. It comes down, the checks and balances. It comes down to the way Congress votes. And it comes down to what these presidential candidates are going to put as their policies that are important, that voters can then press them on once they finally get into office.